Blur is a game that, if you watch enough videos about racing games, you've probably heard of before. And even though it's often treated as a single game separate from anything else, there were a few attempts to turn it into a larger franchise, including an adaptation for Java phones, as well as a direct sequel that ended up cancelled after Bizarre Creations was shut down by Activision. However, in 2013, there was one last attempt to use the Blur name, in the form of a free-to-play game known as Blur Overdrive, released for iOS and Android. Unlike anything that used the Blur name before, Activision was not directly involved, and instead licensed the Blur IP to the publisher Marmalade Play, while development was handled by a company called AppCrowd. The game received little attention when it came out, and it's gotten even less attention in the years following its eventual delisting. So let's see if this mobile adaptation is as much of a hidden gem as the main game. It starts out with a tutorial showing you how to drive, use power-ups, and change your control scheme. The game is played from a top-down perspective, and acceleration is automatic, so the different control schemes are for different ways of steering. You have the choice of a virtual joystick, a steering wheel, and a bar that you swipe across. I found that the steering wheel was the easiest to use, while the bar was a bit unpredictable and the joystick was misaligned with the steering direction for some reason. In terms of structure, Overdrive features rotating lists of events split across different categories. The categories correspond to different car classes, where you start in Class D and work your way up to Class A. There are 9 different event types you'll encounter, with the main one being Battle, a standard 3-lap race against 5 opponents. The rest are all pretty much iterations on Battle, with different amounts of laps or opponents, or higher chances of certain power-ups spawning. The more noteworthy event types are daily showcase battles where you can drive cars you don't own yet, special events where you have to meet certain demands to race, and rival events which are one-on-one races that you have to win to move on to a new category. All events cost fuel to enter, which you have a limited amount of that replenishes over time. Normal events cost 1 fuel, while special events cost 2 and rival races cost 3. Instead of having licensed cars like the game it's based on, Overdrive features an array of fictional cars, and instead of gradually unlocking them as you play, you buy them from a dealership with either cash or gold. One thing that does return from before is the handling classification system. Cars are categorized as grippy, drifty, speedy, or a balance of the 3, which affects how they drive during races. Player mods also return from the main game, adding enhancements to certain power-ups, and just like the cars, you buy them instead of unlocking them directly. On top of these, there are 2 new things in Overdrive that you also buy: performance upgrades and power-up mods. Performance upgrades work like they do in most other racing games, improving stats for individual cars, and power-up mods are essentially upgrades for specific power-ups, improving their effectiveness. Unlike performance upgrades, power-up mods persist across your whole garage, so you don't need to rebuy them when switching cars. In terms of visual customization, Overdrive lets you change your car's paint job like in the original game, as well as place decals that cost cash or gold to apply. While you earn both currencies as you play, gold is much harder to come across and is essentially the game's premium currency. Everything you buy with cash has a wait time before it can be used, and you have the option of paying gold to skip it. The best cars in each class can only be bought with gold, and the performance upgrades and power-up mods have multiple levels, with the higher levels only being purchasable with gold. You can also spend gold on a pre-race loadout to start a race with power-ups of your choosing. It's overall a similar currency system to Real Racing 3 if you've ever played that game, and also like Real Racing 3, you had the option of paying real money for cash or gold, though this doesn't work anymore considering the game is long delisted. Finishing races earns you cash as well as fans and reputation. Reputation is the game's leveling system, and leveling up rewards you with currency and unlocks new mods and upgrades. Moving on to the tracks, Overdrive has an assortment of original tracks set across different locations, like old abandoned raceways, beaches, and city streets. There's only a handful of unique layouts, but the game takes advantage of them with reverse and rotated variants, so they never feel too repetitive. As for the power-ups, they all return from the main game, but their mechanics have been simplified to accommodate mobile gameplay. This means you can't do things like reverse shots with bolts or shunts, forward shots with mines, or use those power-ups defensively by shooting at incoming attacks. The way wrecks work is also different from before. Instead of respawning with full health after being wrecked, now wrecks are permanent, and being wrecked will end the race and place you in last based on how many cars are remaining. This creates opportunities where instead of simply crossing the finish line first, you can also try to wreck all of your opponents and win that way, potentially earning even more cash from wrecking bonuses. That being said, doing this is only really feasible in the Eliminator events, which last for 5 laps. And speaking of Eliminator, the name might lead you to assume that whoever's in last place is disqualified after each lap, when in reality it's just a normal battle race with 5 laps instead of 3. And this is where I'm going to start talking about the more negative aspects of Blur Overdrive, because while it has the potential to be fun, there's a host of things that are either confusing or downright frustrating. For starters, the inclusion of both fans and reputation is pretty counterintuitive. Overdrive doesn't have fan objectives during races, so their only function is for rival demands, which could have just as easily been reputation levels instead. Speaking of rival demands, some require you to have a certain amount of cars in your garage, which is likely higher than the amount you'll have by that point. So you have to spend extra money on cars you're never going to use just to meet these arbitrary demands. There are limited time discounts on individual cars, but these are for cars you can only buy with gold, making them useless if you're just trying to meet rival demands. The car handling classifications are another thing that simply don't function as they should. Because of how the steering controls work, it's essentially impossible to enter a controlled drift, meaning that the drifty cars are just worse, less responsive versions of their non-drifty counterparts. All the tracks are pretty short and narrow, with average lap times ranging from 20 to 30 seconds. It's not really an issue by itself, but most event types have 3 laps, meaning they only last around a minute and a half each. And because events cost fuel, you don't get to play much before being forced to wait for it to replenish. As for the computer opponents, they're really sloppy. They often swerve suddenly when trying to get power-ups, and constantly run into walls, each other, and you on sections of track that otherwise shouldn't be a problem. Hitting another car is especially bad since you pretty much lose all steering control, so you either have to brake or just get run into a wall to get unstuck. All of this means that races are incredibly inconsistent, and the opponents could either run into each other and pose little challenge, or they could all gang up on you and wreck you before you can finish the race. You also start each race in a random position, which leaves your chances of winning partially up to sheer luck. It's especially bad in the one-lap challenge events, where because laps are so short, you'll have very little opportunity to catch up to first if you don't start there. So you could spend all your fuel trying to win a single race, either because you started in a bad position, or got run into a wall by an opponent. This is somewhat offset by the fact that you can still get decent money without winning, and you don't have to do races in order within each class. But I think leaving winning in a racing game up to random chance like this is just bad design all around. I mentioned that the power-ups were simplified to better suit mobile devices, but not much was done beyond that to make sure they work for the kind of game that Overdrive is. Because you can't defend yourself with offensive weapons, you have to rely on finding a shield for defense. The power-ups have a cooldown after being picked up just like in the original Blur, but the aforementioned narrow track designs leave fewer power-up spawns, and a higher chance of an opponent swerving in front of you and taking the one you were going for. It's hard to even anticipate power-ups because of the top-down perspective, and the complete lack of a minimap or any kind of marker to tell you what's ahead. Some of the power-ups also just behave very strangely. If you use a nitro boost and then get hit, you only get slowed down for a little bit before going back up to your boost speed. But if you use it right after getting hit, you get no speed boost whatsoever. The lack of reverse shots makes some power-ups completely useless if you're in first place, and you also can't drop power-ups like you can in Blur, stopping you from getting any more if you already have 3. The shocks are the worst thing to have in first, because they spawn pretty much right in front of the first place car. So if you're using one just to free up space, you'll likely hit yourself because you can't predict where they'll land. And even if these issues aren't enough to stop you from playing, there's really not much content to see. Despite all the artificial barriers made to slow down progression, beating all 4 rivals doesn't take that much time. And once you do, there's nothing left aside from replaying old races, doing daily showcase events, or just buying things you don't have yet. The game gives you a completion percentage based on how many cars and upgrades you have, but so many of them are only available with premium currency, including one car that would have cost around $12 in real money. So this definitely isn't a game I would recommend to completionists. But on that note, I don't think I could recommend this game to anyone. I certainly don't see Blur fans getting anything out of the uninspired, repetitive gameplay, and even beyond anything gameplay related. I'm just not sure why it was made in the first place. In one of my previous videos, I talked about a game called The Crew Road Empire, and while the actual gameplay is different from Blur Overdrive, they're overall the same sort of thing. Both mobile games made as tie-ins to larger PC and console games. The difference is that while Road Empire was made for a highly anticipated upcoming release, Blur Overdrive was based on a then 3-year-old game that didn't even sell well to begin with. As it turns out, Marmalade had a formal agreement with Activision to bring their IPs to mobile devices, and they presumably wanted to do this as quickly and cheaply as possible, leading to Blur Overdrive spending only 6 months in development before release, which likely explains the poor design choices and lack of content. But out of all the IPs Activision owned at the time, I'm surprised Blur was even considered. Aside from low sales, it's a pretty intricately designed game that I think would have a hard time translating to mobile in any form. And regardless of the Blur name, there were already far more worthwhile top-down racing games on mobile, most notably Death Rally, which also features combat and power-ups. In fact, they're similar enough to the point where Blur Overdrive essentially is Death Rally, but with elements from Blur lazily tacked on with little thought about how they would work. I just don't see this game appealing to anyone, and I'm not surprised it's fallen into obscurity. Blur Overdrive is a game that constantly works against itself. Where the original Blur had a feeling of controlled chaos, this game just feels random and annoying. It's not a terrible game, I wouldn't have bothered finishing it if it was, but I also wouldn't have bothered if I wasn't making this video. Anyone who appreciated Blur's tight design won't be satisfied, and anyone else will likely be turned off by the career mode that both drags on and finishes too soon. If you're looking for a good top-down mobile racing game, I'd say look elsewhere.